Anthony was a loving person, had a big heart.
And then he told me that Anthony was gone.
It might be sweet in the moment, but it leads to having to look over your shoulder for the rest of your life.
Anthony Sanks stood in the recording booth with his mother, laying down vocals for a song called Mama.
He was the type of person that people gravitated to.
Days later, she saw the homicide detective walk through her salon door. "I felt like my skin wasn't touching me anywhere," she would say. "I have never in my life felt that type of agony." Her oldest son, 23 years old. Charismatic, the type of person people gravitated to, was gone. Shot 10 times in a parking lot at 2 in the morning. But this story begins in that recording studio, days before the detective's knock. Thank you for being here with me. Before we continue, drop a quick comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Your presence here truly matters. Just a quick note. This story includes some fictional elements added for storytelling and to highlight the lesson. What matters most is the message it carries. Anthony Sanks stood in the recording booth, headphones pressed to his ears, about to lay down vocals for a song he'd written for his mother. The track was called Mama, real near and dear to his heart. He'd told her when he asked if she'd come to the studio. She said yes without hesitation. Now she stood on the other side of the glass, watching him adjust the microphone, waiting for her cue to sing backup. A hair salon owner and former Air Force member, she'd raised 3 boys and spoken to her oldest nearly every day. Today she'd record with him. "Over the hills, excited," she'd said. He grinned at her through the glass and started the first take. His voice filled the booth, smooth and deliberate, each line shaped by the same intensity he'd once brought to the football field. When her harmony came in behind his, the engineer nodded. "That's the one, baby," she said when he pulled the headphones off. "That's the take." Anthony Sanks was 23 years old, an aspiring rapper chasing an entertainment career in San Antonio, Texas. He'd once broken high school football records as a running back. Everyone expected big plays from him. When college and pro football dreams shifted, music became his path. Rap. The stage instead of the field. He had charisma people gravitated to, energy that never quit. "I delivered on the field," he'd said more than once. "Now I deliver on the mic." The reinvention wasn't a retreat, it was another lane, another way to command attention. He recorded constantly, performed locally, built a following. The drive hadn't changed, only the arena. Keep this moment in mind. The studio lights warm, the mother's smile unbroken, the future still unwritten. A young man doing exactly what he loved, with the person who mattered most watching him do it, at home. Anthony's 2 younger brothers copied everything he did. When he got braids, they got braids. When he switched to dreads, they followed. He was their father figure, the one they looked up to for everything. His mother couldn't go a day without hearing his voice. "If I didn't talk to him every day, I spoke to him every other day," she would later say. "We were in constant communication. He was a loving person with a big heart, protective and present, the kind of son who called to check in, who made sure his family knew he was thinking of them, the kind of brother who set the example and expected his younger siblings to follow it. "You were always so passionate, Anthony," his mother had told him in the booth. Passionate, driven, alive. Anthony walked out of that studio with the track saved and his phone in his pocket, unaware that within days a message would arrive asking him to step outside barefoot. Trusting, into a parking lot at 2 in the morning. The last person to see him alive would be someone he knew. By sunrise on January 7, 2020, that parking lot would become a crime scene. The 911 calls started just before 9 a.m. On January 7, 2020, residents reporting gunshots heard hours earlier. A body spotted in the northwest side apartment complex parking lot. By the time the homicide detective arrived, the sun was climbing over San Antonio and Anthony Sanks was already gone. He lay in the parking lot where he'd walked out to meet someone in the middle of the night. No shoes on his feet. That detail mattered. If a man steps outside his apartment at 2 in the morning without putting shoes on, he's not planning to go far. He's meeting someone close by, someone he knows, someone he trusts enough not to bother with shoes. 9 shell casings scattered around the body. 10 gunshot wounds. 8 entry wounds to the front, 2 to the back. The forensic picture came together quickly. 2 shooters, firing from different positions. This wasn't random. This was targeted. Surveillance footage from the complex captured a black Jeep Compass leaving the scene shortly after the shots were fired. Broken taillight. Missing hubcap. The vehicle stood out, and the camera had caught it. The detective made note of the details and turned his attention to the phone found near the body. Locked. Password protected. Whatever messages had brought Anthony out into that parking lot were trapped inside. Keep that phone in mind. The detective needed to reach Anthony's mother. She owned a hair salon across town, and when he tracked her there mid-morning, she was opening for the day. He walked through the door, and she looked up from behind the counter. Her face changed before he said a word. "Are you homicide?" she asked. He nodded. "I need you to say it," she said. He told her. Anthony was gone. There is no preparation for this, no script that makes those words land softer when a detective tells a mother her son will never call again. She would later describe the agony as something physical, something that disconnected her from her own body. "My skin wasn't touching me anywhere," she said. "I have never in my life felt that type of agony." The son she'd spoken to nearly every day. The young man she'd recorded a song with just days before. The oldest of her 3 boys, gone in a parking lot at 2 in the morning, barefoot. Shot 10 times by 2 people he'd walked out to meet. The detective asked if she knew the passcode to Anthony's phone. She did. She gave it to him through tears, her voice steady enough to get the numbers out. The detective held the locked phone in the evidence bag, the passcode now written in his notes. Whatever was on that phone, texts, calls, messages, would tell them who Anthony went out to meet at 2 a.m. The answer was waiting inside. Within hours, that phone would unlock a name the detective had never heard. NHC Bobo. The passcode unlocked the phone on the first try. Back at the station, the detective held Anthony's phone and scrolled through the screen texts. Calls, social media accounts still logged in. The device held the last hours of a young man's life in digital form. Every message, every interaction, every thread that might explain why he walked barefoot into a parking lot at 2 in the morning and never came back. Facebook Messenger. The detective opened the app and began scrolling through the threads. Friends, family, acquaintances. Then one contact stood out. NHC Bobo. The last messages in that thread were sent just before 2 a.m. on January 7th. The detective read them slowly. NHC Bobo had messaged Anthony first. "Come outside for a minute." Anthony replied, "Aight, give me a sec." That was it. No explanation, no context. Just a request to step outside and a quick acknowledgement. Minutes later, Anthony was dead in the parking lot. The detective stared at the screen. NHC Bobo had called him out. Not a random encounter. Not a chance meeting in the parking lot. A deliberate lure. Anthony had been set up. "Who the hell is NHC Bobo?" he muttered. The name meant nothing. It wasn't in any database. Wasn't on any arrest record or witness list. It was a street handle. A nickname. An alias hiding the real identity of whoever had sent that message. Phones record the message. They don't record who was actually holding the device. But the message was clear. Someone had reached out to Anthony in the middle of the night and asked him to come outside, and he'd trusted them enough to go. How do you hunt a killer when the only name you have is a street handle that could belong to anyone? The detective forwarded the screenshots to the case file and kept digging. By late afternoon, the medical examiner's preliminary findings arrived. The detective read the report carefully. 10 gunshot wounds total. 8 entry wounds to the front of...
It was safe to assume that there were 2 separate shooters.
One shooter in front of Anthony, one behind. They'd positioned themselves before he stepped into the parking lot, waiting for him to walk into the crossfire. 2 shooters, one front, one behind, the medical examiner confirmed over the phone. They positioned themselves before he came out. Targeted hit, the detective said. He was set up. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a dispute that escalated in the moment. This was a coordinated execution. 2 people, 2 weapons, 1 victim. Lured out by a message on his phone. The detective looked back at the glowing screen. NHC Bobo. The contact who'd called Anthony out to die. The person who'd set the trap. But NHC Bobo wasn't a birth name. Wasn't something he could run through records and pull an address. It was a street name, a digital ghost. And finding out who hid behind that handle would be the first real break in the case. Within a week, an informant would whisper a real name to match the alias. 7 days after Anthony Sanks died in that parking lot, a detective working undercover on the streets received a whisper. NHC. Bobo had a real name. The informant, a street source who'd been feeding intelligence to law enforcement for months, approached with the answer the case needed. NHC Bobo. That's John Sheringhausen, the informant said. Everybody knows him by that handle. The detective wrote the name down. John Sheringhausen. It meant nothing to him yet, but it would. Within hours. The team ran the name through every database available. Sheringhausen had a history. Known on the streets. Connected to the same circles Anthony moved in. And the phone records matched. The number tied to the Facebook account NHC Bobo belonged to Sheringhausen. And that number was all over Anthony's messages in the hours before he died. The detective stared at the screen. The ghost had a face now. John Sheringhausen had sent the message asking Anthony to come outside at 2 in the morning. He'd lured him out barefoot into that parking lot. And minutes later, Anthony was dead from 10 gunshots fired by 2 shooters. Sheringhausen wasn't just a contact. He was the linchpin. But why? The detective leaned in. There's more to this, he said. Something that went down before. The informant nodded. It goes back to last summer. A drive-by. That's when this whole thing started. Last summer. Months before Anthony's murder. The detective waited. How far back does revenge reach before it finds the beginning of its own story? Sheringhausen was caught in the middle of something, the informant continued. Had to choose a side. The details were vague. A shooting, a house, fear, and the kind of bad blood that doesn't fade. The informant didn't give full specifics, but the shape of it came through clearly enough. This wasn't random violence. This was payback. Anthony Sanks hadn't died because of a dispute that night in the parking lot. He died because of something he'd done or ordered done months earlier. A drive-by shooting. A house riddled with bullets. A family caught in the crossfire. And now someone had decided to settle that score. Scheringhausen's name was on the messages, but the motive stretched backward into the summer of 2019, to an incident that left scars deep enough to justify murder. The detective jotted notes. The informant's words were fragments, not the full story, but they gave the case a new direction. Whatever happened last summer had set this revenge chain in motion, and Anthony Sanks had been the first casualty. The detective had a name, John Scheringhausen, and confirmation that he'd lured Anthony to his death. But the why still hung in the air. A half-told story. The informant's words echoed last summer. A drive-by. A house. Whatever happened back then had set everything in motion. The trail led backward to June 2019 to another family's terror. The report read like a war zone. June 2019. A house on the south side of San Antonio. 12 to 13 rounds fired through walls and windows while a family slept inside. The homeowner's name on the incident report was Andrew Salazar. Andrew Salazar was 28 years old, a devoted father since his teenage years who dreamed of building a construction business while raising his son. That June night, he'd been home with his wife, their young granddaughter, and his father. Jesus Salazar, a former police department employee and father of 5. I heard popping noises, Andrew told officers when they arrived. My wife heard it louder. She yelled they were shooting at the house. 13 rounds tore through the structure. Bullets punched through walls. Shattered windows. Splintered wood. The granddaughter was inside. So was Jesus. None of them were hit. But the terror didn't need blood to be absolute. The family couldn't sleep in that house anymore. They couldn't feel safe in the place they'd called home. We moved out real quick, Andrew said in the report. Within a month, we were gone. A drive-by shooting that displaced a family, left a child traumatized, and shattered any sense of security. No arrests were made at the time. The case went cold. But Andrew Salazar hadn't forgotten. When does a victim stop being a victim and become the reason for the violence that kills him? The detective sat in the station with the June 2019 report in front of him and the January 2020 murder file beside it. The pieces locked together. John Scheringhausen had pulled the trigger that night in June 2019, firing those rounds into the Salazar home. But he hadn't acted alone. He'd carried out the attack under Anthony Sanks's direction. Sanks had ordered it, and Andrew Salazar had eventually discovered who was behind the terror that forced his family out of their home. Salazar found out. He wanted Sanks dead for what happened to his family. So he'd confronted Scheringhausen, the man who'd actually fired the shots, and delivered an ultimatum. Help me get revenge on Anthony. Sanks or die. Scheringhausen chose survival. He agreed to lure Sanks out into that parking lot on January 7, 2020. He sent the Facebook message asking Anthony to come outside at 2 in the morning. And when Anthony walked out barefoot, trusting whoever had called him, 2 shooters were waiting. Revenge, the detective said aloud. That's what this whole thing is built on. Anthony Sanks, the aspiring rapper, the loving son, the young man with big dreams, had been the one who ordered the June 2019 drive-by that terrorized the Salazar family. He'd instigated the violence that would eventually come back to kill him. Andrew Salazar had threatened Scheringhausen into helping execute that revenge. The wheel of violence had turned full circle. Shooter became target. Victim became avenger. But the story didn't end there. 15 days after Sanks died, the wheel would turn again. 15 days after Anthony Sanks bled out in a parking lot, Gunshots echoed through the southeast side of San Antonio. January 22nd, 2020. Evening. Andrew Salazar was driving through his neighborhood when his truck suddenly stopped. Brake lights first, glowing red in the darkness. Then the flashers came on, the universal signal of trouble. Gunshots shattered the night. A witness returning home from work saw it unfold in seconds, two males running from the vehicle. Hoodies pulled up, faces obscured, disappearing into the darkness before anyone could react. The truck sat in the street, flashers still blinking. Inside, Andrew Salazar slumped over the steering wheel. The 911 calls flooded in. I heard gunshots, then saw two guys running from the truck. Officers arrived to find Andrew unresponsive. Multiple gunshot wounds. Another young man dead in a vehicle on a San Antonio street. Another one, the dispatcher said. Southeast side this time. The call went out to Jesus Salazar. He raced to the scene, his heart already knowing what his mind refused to accept. Officers had cordoned off the truck by the time he arrived, yellow tape strung across the block, flashing lights painting the pavement in red and blue. Jesus, a former police department employee, was allowed close enough to see. There was his son, Andrew, 28 years old, slumped over the wheel. Gone. There is no arithmetic for this. No equation that makes a father's second loss equal to justice for the first. I could see my son, Jesus would later say. I knew it was him. 15 days earlier, Andrew had orchestrated the murder of Anthony Sanks as revenge for the drive-by shooting that had terrorized his family. He'd threatened John Sheringhausen into luring Sanks out into that parking lot, and two shooters had executed the plan. Andrew had been the avenger, the one seeking justice for bullets fired through his home while his granddaughter slept inside. Now he was the victim. The hunter had become the hunted. The detective got the call and connected the dots immediately. This is connected to the Sanks murder, he said. Has to be. 2 murders in 15 days, both tied to the June 2019 drive-by that started the whole chain. Sheringhausen had helped Andrew kill Sanks, but who had killed Andrew? The same pattern, 2 shooters, a coordinated hit. Witnesses seeing figures running from the scene. Sheringhausen's name came up again. Had he turned on the man who'd forced him into committing murder? Or was someone else cleaning up the mess, eliminating everyone involved in Sanks' death? We need to find Sheringhausen, the detective said. Now. The revenge hadn't ended with Sanks' execution. It had multiplied, consuming everyone it touched. Andrew Salazar had sought to balance the scales for his family's terror, and it had cost him his life 2 weeks later. 2 murders. 2 families destroyed. The wheel of revenge was still spinning, and John Sheringhausen was somewhere out there. Either the next target or the next killer. Finding him became the only priority. 19 days after Andrew Salazar died in his truck, police spotted John Sheringhausen in a vehicle on the west side of San Antonio. February 10th, 2020. Officers pulled the vehicle over, lights flashing red and blue against the afternoon sky. Sheringhausen sat in the passenger seat. A friend was driving. When officers approached, he didn't look surprised. He looked calm, almost like he'd been expecting this. John Sheringhausen. Yeah, that's me. You're under arrest for the murder of Anthony Sanks. He didn't resist, didn't ask questions, didn't try to run. He just nodded as the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists, cold metal against skin. The officers helped him out of the vehicle, read him his rights, and placed him in the back of the patrol car. The friend watched, silent, as the car doors closed and Sheringhausen was driven to the police station. Inside the station, Sheringhausen was walked into an interrogation room, stark white walls, a metal table bolted to the floor. a recorder waiting on the surface. He sat down, hands cuffed, and waited. The detective entered, carrying a file folder thick with evidence. He set it on the table and sat across from Sheringhausen. The recorder clicked on. This is the moment before the confession. Before the lies unravel, when the case hangs on what comes next. Before the interrogation begins, a quick question. Comment A if you think Sheringhausen will confess, or B if you think he'll stick to his story and add one reason why in 5 to 10 words. This is where the case breaks open. Quick note, the next part includes some recreated dialogue for narrative purposes. Based on documented interrogation evidence, the detective started with the basics. I don't know anything about any shooting, Sheringhausen said. His voice was measured, careful. Every word sounded rehearsed. The detective leaned back. Did you know Anthony Sanks? A pause. Sheringhausen shifted in his seat. Yeah, I knew him. Another pause. But I didn't have anything to do with what happened. The detective watched him closely. The way he answered, not too fast, not too slow. The way he admitted just enough to seem honest, but denied just enough to stay safe. Every denial felt calculated. Every admission carefully chosen. Sheringhausen claimed he knew Sanks, but had no involvement in the parking lot shooting. He stuck to that line, repeating it in different words, as if saying it enough times would make it true. But the detective had the phone record sitting in the folder in front of him. The Facebook Messenger threads showing NHC Bobo Sheringhausen's handle, asking Anthony to come outside at 2 in the morning. The surveillance video capturing a black Jeep Compass with a broken tail light leaving the scene. Sheringhausen sat across the table, admitting he knew Sanks, but swearing he had no part in the murder. He didn't know how much evidence was already stacked against him. The interrogation was about to get much harder. The detective slid the phone records across the interrogation table, page after page, with one name repeating. NHC Bobo. Sheringhausen's Facebook handle. Messaging Anthony Sanks minutes before he died. Sheringhausen stared at the papers. His expression shifted. The careful denials, the measured answers, they were crumbling under the weight of printed proof. This is your phone, the detective said. These are your messages. You lured him out there. Sheringhausen didn't respond immediately. He looked at the messages. Timestamped January 7th, 2020, just before 2 a.m. The request to come outside. Anthony's quick reply. The last exchange before a young man walked barefoot into a parking lot and never came back. The detective continued. We have surveillance video of a black Jeep leaving the scene. We have witness accounts of 2 shooters. Forensic evidence confirms a coordinated hit. 8 rounds to the front, 2 to the back. This wasn't random. You set him up. Sheringhausen leaned back in his chair. I didn't have a choice. The detective waited. Then tell me what happened. And Sheringhausen talked. He admitted carrying out the June 2019 drive-by shooting, the one that sent 12 to 13 rounds through Andrew Salazar's home while his family slept inside. He'd pulled the trigger that night, but he claimed Anthony Sanks had given the order. When Salazar discovered who was behind the attack, he came for Sheringhausen with an ultimatum. Salazar told me, "Help me get Sanks, or I'll kill you," Sheringhausen said. What was I supposed to do? The threat was direct. Salazar wanted revenge for the terror inflicted on his family, and Sheringhausen was the leverage. He could cooperate and help execute the man who'd ordered the drive-by, or he could refuse and become the next body. How much of a confession is the truth? And how much is a man rewriting his role to survive what comes next? Sheringhausen kept talking. He named a second person, Anthony Nash, known on the streets as Jiggy. Anthony Nash Jiggy, he was the one driving, Sheringhausen said. Black Jeep Compass, broken taillight on the driver's side, missing hubcap on the front passenger side. The details poured out. Nash had driven them to the parking lot that night. Sheringhausen admitted using his phone, his Facebook Messenger account, to lure Sanks outside. The message asking him to come out. The trust that made Anthony walk out barefoot, thinking he was meeting someone safe. You used your phone to set him up, the detective said. You asked him to come outside. Yeah, Sheringhausen said. I did that. The detective wrote it all down. Anthony Nash, black Jeep Compass, broken taillight, missing hubcap. The vehicle description matched the surveillance footage frame by frame. The name, the details, the timeline. Sheringhausen's story was too specific to be fabricated. But the question remained, was he the manipulated middleman he claimed to be, forced into murder by Salazar's ultimatum? Or was he the orchestrator, spinning a survival tale that shifted blame and minimized his role? The black Jeep would tell its own story soon enough. The surveillance footage played, frame by frame. Black Jeep Compass, broken driver's side taillight glowing red, front passenger hubcap missing, exactly as Sheringhausen described. The detective froze the video at the clearest angle. The Jeep's details were unmistakable, captured as it left the parking lot where Anthony Sanks had died. He ran the vehicle registration. The results came back within minutes. Black Jeep Compass with that exact damage profile, broken taillight, missing hubcap, registered to Anthony Nash, same address, same vehicle. Registration comes back to Anthony Nash, the detective said. Same address, same vehicle. Another officer leaned over the monitor. Broken taillight, missing hubcap. It's all here on video. Vehicle records, surveillance footage. Sheringhausen's confession. All three lined up perfectly, pointing at the same man. Anthony Nash wasn't just a name mentioned in an interrogation room. He was the getaway driver, captured on camera leaving the scene minutes after a young man had been gunned down in the middle of the night. We need to find him now. Days later, Jesus Salazar called the detective with a discovery. After Andrew's truck had been released from evidence, Jesus had gone through his son's belongings, sorting through the pain, trying to make sense of what remained. He found a car key inside the truck that didn't belong to Andrew. I found this key in Andrew's truck, Jesus told the detective when he came to the station. It's not his. The detective examined the key fob. Metal. Worn. Ordinary. But whose sometimes justice comes from the smallest things, a father sorting through his dead son's belongings. A key that shouldn't be there. A detail that answers everything. The detective pulled Anthony Nash's social media accounts. He scrolled back through months of posts and photos. Then he stopped. One image, dated months before the murders. Nash standing with friends, smiling for the camera. And there, hanging from his belt loop, was a key fob. The same key fob Jesus held in his hand. Look at this photo from Nash's social media, the detective said. Same key fob on his belt. Jesus stared at the screen. The key he'd found in his son's truck, the truck where Andrew had been shot and killed, matched the key Nash carried in a photo from months earlier. The connection was undeniable. Nash had been in that truck. He hadn't just driven the black Jeep for Anthony Sanks' murder. He'd been at Andrew Salazar's murder scene too, close enough to drop his key inside the vehicle where he'd taken another life. Nash was at both scenes, the detective said. He's not just the driver, he's a killer. Anthony Nash was connected to both murders now. Getaway driver for Sanks, killer of Salazar. The key in the truck and the Jeep on surveillance left no doubt. But Nash had vanished. No one had seen him in days. Detectives knew that men who kill twice don't usually stop running. The search for Nash would stretch across state lines and more than a year. The arrest warrant for Anthony Nash was signed in February 2020, but by the time detectives arrived at his last known address, he was already gone. Empty apartment. No forwarding information. No sign of when he'd left or where he'd headed. The detective checked Nash's mother's apartment next. "He's not here," she said. "Nobody's seen him in weeks." Every address, every contact, every connection the detective ran down turned up the same answer. Nash had vanished. Fugitives who cross state lines become a different kind of problem. The San Antonio detectives brought in U.S. Marshals, federal agents trained to hunt people who run across borders and disappear into the anonymity of another state. The Marshals coordinated with Louisiana authorities, prepared to track Nash wherever he'd fled. Nash's father, when questioned by detectives, revealed what had happened after the murders. "My son was hospitalized. Mental institution," he said. What happened broke him. Anthony Nash, after killing 2 men in 15 days, had suffered a complete mental breakdown. He'd been admitted to a psychiatric facility, unable to cope with the violence he'd participated in. The guilt, the fear, the weight of knowing he'd taken lives. After his release from the hospital, he ran. Louisiana. He'd crossed into another state, putting distance between himself and San Antonio, trying to outrun the consequences waiting for him. "We'll coordinate with Louisiana authorities," the marshals said. "He can't hide forever." But Nash tried. Weeks became months. Leads dried up in Louisiana. Nash moved carefully, avoided contact, stayed invisible. The marshals chased shadows across the state, possible sightings in Shreveport that led nowhere, addresses in Baton Rouge that turned up empty. Every tip, every lead, every piece of intelligence dissolved before they could close the distance. February 2020 became summer. Summer became fall. Fall became 2021. 17 months is long enough for the families to bury their sons, learn to live without answers, and wonder if justice would ever find its way home. "Another dead end," the marshals reported. "He's not in Shreveport." The detective kept the file open, the warrant active. Fugitives slip up eventually. They get tired of running. Or they miss home. Or they convince themselves enough time has passed that no one is still looking. "It's been over a year," one of the officers said. "He's good at disappearing." Then in July 2021, intelligence surfaced. A tip came in from an informant. Nash was back in San Antonio, close to his mother's apartment. After 17 months, hundreds of miles, and countless dead ends, Anthony Nash had returned to the place he'd fled. The detective knew fugitives came back for 2 reasons: desperation or the belief they'd gotten away with it. Either way, Nash was about to find out he was wrong. The arrest would happen on July 21st, 2021, exactly 18 months and 14 days after Anthony Sanks died. July 21st, 2021, dawn. Anthony Nash opened the door at his mother's apartment to find detectives and U.S. Marshals waiting. 18 months of running over in an instant. "Anthony Nash, you're under arrest for the murders of Anthony Sanks and Andrew Salazar." Nash didn't look surprised. He looked tired. He looked like a man who'd known this day was coming since the moment he'd pulled the trigger. "I know," he said. No fight. No chase. No attempt to run again. Just the exhaustion of someone who'd carried the weight of 2 murders for a year and a half and couldn't carry it anymore. The handcuffs clicked onto his wrists. He was walked out of the apartment past his mother, past the small life he'd tried to rebuild after fleeing Louisiana, and into a waiting patrol car. The door closed. The convoy pulled away. At the San Antonio Police Department, Nash was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, documented. The manhunt that had stretched 17 months across 2 states ended with a man too tired to run anymore. "Anything you want to say?" the detective asked as Nash sat in the booking room. Nash shook his head. Not yet. Later that afternoon, detectives obtained Anthony Nash's phone location records. The digital trail he couldn't erase. Every call, every movement, every place his phone had connected to a cell tower, mapped and time-stamped. The detective pulled up the data on the screen and scrolled to the dates that mattered. January 7th, 2020, 2:03 a.m. Nash's phone pinged at the Northwest Side apartment complex parking lot where Anthony Sanks had been shot and killed. The phone in his pocket tracked every step the device he carried mapped his guilt mile by mile. Ping by ping. Murder by murder. His phone was at the Sanks parking lot, the detective said. 2:03 a.m., January 7th, 2020. He scrolled further. January 22nd, 2020. Convention. The same phone at the Southeast Side location where Andrew Salazar had died, slumped over his truck's steering wheel. And here, same phone. January 22nd, Southeast Side. Salazar's murder. The data was irrefutable. Nash had been physically present at both murders. He wasn't just the getaway driver for Anthony Sanks' killing. He'd been at Andrew Salazar's murder, too, close enough to kill. Close enough to drop his car key inside the victim's truck. The digital footprint confirmed what every other piece of evidence had already suggested. He was there for both, the detective said. The evidence doesn't lie. The phone record sealed it. Nash was at the Northwest parking lot when Sanks died. At the Southeast Side when Salazar fell. Scheringhausen's confession. The surveillance video of the black Jeep with the broken taillight. Jesus Salazar's discovery of the key. And now this, the phone location data tying Nash to both scenes with the kind of precision only technology could provide. Every piece pointed to the same conclusion. 2 young men dead, Anthony Nash present for both. The getaway driver who became a killer, caught in a revenge chain that consumed everyone it touched. Now detectives had to piece together why the revenge wheel kept spinning. With Scheringhausen's confession and Nash's phone records side by side, the detective assembled the complete chain, every link, every decision, every death, traced back to June 2019. It starts June 2019, the detective said. Sanks orders the hit on Salazar's house through Scheringhausen. The drive-by. 12 to 13 rounds fired through walls where a family slept. Andrew Salazar's wife. His father, Jesus. His young granddaughter, all inside. All terrorized. A family forced to move within a month. Their safety shattered by bullets ordered by a man they'd never met. Salazar finds out who shot up his home. Threatens Scheringhausen, "Help me get Sanks, or I kill you." Scheringhausen chose survival. He agreed to help Salazar orchestrate revenge against Anthony Sanks. January 7th, 2020, 2 a.m. Scheringhausen sent the Facebook Messenger text asking Anthony to come outside. Sanks walked out barefoot into a parking lot on the Northwest Side. 2 shooters, Scheringhausen and Salazar, fired 10 rounds. 8 to the front, 2 to the back. Anthony Nash drove the getaway vehicle. His black Jeep Compass with the broken taillight captured on surveillance. Sanks died in that parking lot. Executed by the man whose family he'd terrorized. Nash gets paranoid. Thinks Salazar will turn him in. Shoots him 15 days after Sanks dies. January 22nd, 2020. Nash wasn't ordered to kill Andrew Salazar. He was afraid Salazar would betray him. So Nash eliminated the witness, shooting Salazar in his truck on the southeast side, leaving the Avenger slumped over his steering wheel. When does revenge stop being justice and become the thing it set out to destroy? The revenge wheel turned full circle. Anthony Sanks, the instigator, gunned down in a parking lot. Andrew Salazar, the Avenger, killed by the accomplice he'd trusted, John Sheringhausen, caught between two dead men. Facing 40 years for the murder of Sanks, Anthony Nash, the paranoid driver turned killer, sentenced to 20 years concurrent for both murders. 2 dead, 2 convicted. And for what? The detective said. Revenge didn't bring anyone back. It just multiplied the bodies. 2 families destroyed. 2 young lives ended. Justice served, but hollow convictions secured. Sentences handed down, but no one whole. Anthony's mother would never hear her son's voice again. Jesus Salazar buried his son. The key from Nash's belt loop, a reminder of how close evil had come. The wheel stops here, the detective said, but not before it destroyed everything. The detective closed the case file. A drive-by in June 2019 became 2 murders 15 days apart. In January 2020 became 2 convictions a year later. The phone that lured Anthony Sanks to his death. The key that linked Nash to Salazar's truck. The surveillance that captured everything technology and testimony converged to answer one question. Who killed them? Everyone touched by revenge. But justice in a courtroom looks different than justice in a parking lot. October 2021. Bexar County Courthouse. John Sheringhausen sat at the defense table, pale under fluorescent lights, as the prosecutor rose to present the state's evidence. The jury leaned forward. This was the moment that would decide whether the cycle that consumed Anthony Sanks and Andrew Salazar would finally reach a legal endpoint or spiral into endless appeals. Evidence mounted like stones on a grave. Phone records showed Sheringhausen's location near the Northwest Side apartment complex on January 7, 2020, just before 2 a.m., the exact time and place Anthony Sanks was shot. Text messages to his girlfriend surfaced, time-stamped hours before the murder. "We're about to hit a lick." The words glowed on the screen, projected for the jury. A casual boast about a crime that would end the young man's life. Timeline reconstructions matched Nash's testimony perfectly. Every minute accounted for. Every movement corroborated. Security footage placed Sheringhausen's vehicle within blocks of the scene. Headlights captured on camera. Direction of travel matching the route to the parking lot. Each exhibit passed to the jury felt like a nail driven deeper. Sheringhausen's attorney saw the verdict forming in real time. Guilty. Inevitable. Inescapable. The defense had nothing left to argue. Anthony's mother sat in the gallery, hands folded in her lap, watching the man who killed her son realize there was no escape. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Her face held no anger, no satisfaction. Only the weight of 1.5 years spent waiting for this moment. Mid-trial. During a recess, the defense attorney approached the prosecutor. Quiet negotiation. Whispered strategy. The evidence was overwhelming, and both sides knew it. Fighting would only delay what everyone in that courtroom already understood. The outcome was already written. When court reconvened, Sheringhausen stood. The room went silent. He changed his plea to guilty for the murder of Anthony Sanks. The judge accepted without hesitation. 40 years. No parole eligibility for decades. The gavel fell. The courtroom exhaled a collective release of breath held too long. Anthony's mother closed her eyes. Not relief, not triumph, just exhaustion. The moment she'd waited for had arrived, and it felt like bureaucratic resolution meeting irreversible loss, hollow, formal, insufficient. Justice served. But Andrew Salazar's name was absent from the charges. Scheringhausen had been at both murders helping kill Sanks, participating in the revenge plot that started with Salazar's ultimatum. Yet prosecutors never charged him for Andrew Salazar's death. One murder counted, the other overlooked in plea negotiations. The symmetry was broken. 40 years behind bars. Anthony Sanks avenged in the eyes of the law. But the prosecutors never charged Scheringhausen for Andrew Salazar's death. Only Nash carried that conviction. 2 murders, 2 men sentenced. But the pattern felt incomplete. Justice without completeness. Anthony's mother stood and walked out of the courtroom. Jesus Salazar wasn't there. This verdict wasn't for his son. The revenge chain had closed around Anthony Sanks, but Andrew Salazar's name remained absent from the legal resolution. His death acknowledged in testimony, but not in charges. And in February 2023, Nash would make his own deal with the courts. February 2023. Anthony Nash stood before the same judge, younger than Scheringhausen, his attorney already negotiating the final terms. The prosecutor rose, measured and clinical, outlining Nash's role in a revenge chain that had claimed 2 lives. The state acknowledges the defendant's lesser role, the prosecutor said. Getaway driver in the murder of Anthony Sanks, shooter in the murder of Andrew Salazar. Lesser culpability than Scheringhausen. Younger, believed to be coerced by older accomplices. The words hung in the courtroom, parsed and weighed. Nash had been present for both killings, driving the black Jeep with the broken taillight away from the parking lot where Sanks died, pulling the trigger that left Salazar slumped in his truck 15 days later. But the state saw him as the follower, not the leader. The man caught in a cycle he didn't start. 20 years on both counts, to run concurrently, the prosecutor continued. Concurrent, the word echoed through the gallery. Nash would serve 20 years, but not 40. Not one sentence stacked on top of the other. Both murders folded into the same timeline, the same 2 decades behind bars. Andrew Salazar's death. Legally acknowledged. Formally charged. Officially counted, but adding no consequence. Does the defendant accept the terms? The judge asked. Nash's attorney nodded. Nash himself remained silent, standing as the plea was entered and the gavel prepared to fall. Concurrent 2 murders running on the same clock, as if Andrew Salazar's life could be folded into the same 20-year sentence without remainder. Jesus Salazar sat in the gallery beside Anthony Sanks' mother. 2 families united by loss, separated by the uneven math of justice. The judge accepted the plea. Nash would serve time for both murders. He was the only defendant charged for Andrew Salazar's death. Scheringhausen had walked away from that count entirely in his plea deal. But the concurrent sentence meant Andrew's murder didn't add a single year to the calendar. Jesus stared at the floor. Anthony's mother looked at the ceiling. Neither moved when the gavel fell. Does the Salazar family wish to make a statement? The judge asked. Jesus shook his head. No, Your Honor. What was there to say? The man who killed his son would serve 2 decades. The man who helped kill Anthony Sanks would serve 4. Neither sentence brought anyone back. Neither verdict made the families whole. Justice has been served, the prosecutor said after the gavel fell. But closure doesn't exist here. 2 killers sentenced. 2 families left in the gallery. Justice delivered in 40-year and 20-year packages. But neither mother, neither brother walked out whole. The revenge chain had closed. Sanks dead. Salazar dead. Sheringhausen and Nash convicted and sentenced. But closure, as the prosecutor admitted, didn't exist in this courtroom. What remains when the gavel falls and the families go home? Years have passed since the courtroom doors closed, and San Antonio looks the same, but Anthony Sanks's mother still cannot listen to his unfinished tracks. The demo recordings sit in a drawer, unopened. The song they recorded together, Mama, remains incomplete. Her voice layered behind his, captured in a studio session that feels like it happened in another lifetime. She thought a verdict would bring something. Reiful. Maybe. Closure. But the convictions didn't restore what was taken. They're in prison, she says when people ask how she's doing. But Anthony's still gone. Jesus Salazar drives past the parking lot where his brother Andrew died and doesn't stop anymore. In the beginning, he would pull over, sit in the car, try to make sense of it. Now he just keeps driving. 2 families, 2 graves, no closure despite 2 convictions. The music career that never launched. The brother who never came home. Revenge didn't restore either. It only multiplied the loss. Turned 1 death into 2. 2 victims into 4 men whose futures were erased by a cycle none of them could stop. Was justice worth the cost? 2 young men dead, 2 in prison for decades, families shattered, and not 1 life restored. The irony prosecutors never emphasized sits in an evidence locker somewhere, tagged and cataloged. Sheringhausen's phone, the device he used to text his girlfriend hours before the murder, were about to hit a lick. The same phone used to coordinate the attacks, to plan revenge, to set the trap. Digital trails don't lie. Every text message timestamped, every location ping recorded, every call logged. The phone became the evidence that convicted him. Messages that couldn't be erased, data that couldn't be explained away. The device that called Anthony and Andrew to their deaths was the same device that finally answered for them. Technology turned witness. The instrument of murder became the proof of guilt. Anthony Sanks wanted to be a rapper. To make it out of San Antonio on beats and verses. He stood in that recording booth with his mother, headphones pressed to his ears, dreaming of stages and crowds and a future built on music. He never got the chance. The revenge cycle consumed him. First consumed Andrew Salazar, John Sheringhausen, and Anthony Nash. 2 dead, 2 caged for decades. All futures erased. Sheringhausen will spend 40 years behind bars for a murder set in motion by the drive-by he carried out under orders. Nash will serve 20 for both killings, his paranoia turning him from driver to executioner. Andrew Salazar sought revenge for his family's terror and paid with his life 15 days later. And Anthony Sanks, 23 years old, a son who called his mother every day, a young man with dreams bigger than the streets that killed him, died barefoot in a parking lot because a phone message asked him to step outside. The phone he used to call them to death was the phone that finally answered for them. That phone, the device that coordinated murder, became the evidence that sealed justice. But justice doesn't restore what was lost. Anthony Sanks never got to finish the music career he dreamed of. Andrew Salazar never came home to his family. 2 young men, 2 families, 2 futures erased by a revenge cycle no one could stop. Their mothers still live with the absence. Jesus Salazar still drives past the parking lot where his brother died. The convictions brought accountability, but they didn't bring closure. The lesson here is stark revenge doesn't settle scores.
The never-ending cycle of revenge.
One drive-by shooting in June 2019 became 2 murders 15 days apart in January 2020. 2 deaths became 2 convictions, and everyone touched by the cycle lost something they can never get back. The wheel of violence only stops when someone chooses not to turn it again, and by then, it's often too late. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Drop a comment below. What do you think? Can justice ever truly bring closure to a family after loss like this? Your perspective might help someone else who's struggling with similar questions. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about the cost of revenge, feel free to share this video. Thank you for listening to this story with me. It means more than you know. This account is based on a real case that occurred in San Antonio, Texas, in 2020. Some scenes have been dramatized for storytelling purposes, but the core events, evidence, and outcomes are drawn from court records and documented sources. My deepest respect goes to the families of Anthony Sanks and Andrew Salazar, who continue to live with this loss every day.
I could see my son. I knew it was him.